Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a time when your alarm clock is a rooster with personal issues, your shoes are optional and very soggy, and your to-do list includes things like keep the goat from headbutting the mayor's wife. Welcome to a misty, muddled, mud-caked morning in medieval France, and not from the vantage point of a knight or a king, but from someone a little closer to the ground, quite literally. You're a child. 7, maybe 9 if we're being generous, though you already feel about 70 from the weight of your wooden bucket. Your feet sink slightly into the cold village path, toes disappearing in the thick muck that somehow feels both slimy and crunchy. It's early, fog clings to thatch roofs like forgotten laundry, and your breath forms little puffs in the air as you shuffle past the sleeping chickens. You probably won't survive this, of course, not because of violence or pestilence, though they're certainly around, but because your job today involves standing in a cold orchard yelling at birds for 8 hours straight, and no one's invented gloves or lunch breaks. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, leave a comment with your location and the current time. Are you unwinding in Manila at 10:42 p.m. or half asleep in Stockholm at 1:18 a.m.? I'd love to know where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle past your mother, already elbow deep in bread dough, who mumbles something about gooseberries and sends you out with a half-stale crust and a pointed look. Outside, the village is just beginning to blink awake. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys. A donkey brays like it's forgotten how, and somewhere nearby, a dog sneezes itself into confusion. You are not going to school. You are going to work. Because in this village, childhood is less about tag and more about tiny, unpaid internships in the grand economy of survival. The grown-ups have their own tasks, plowing, baking, brewing, sewing, but someone needs to shout at the birds, carry water, scrub pots, and retrieve eggs from hens with deeply personal vendettas. That's where you come in. You pass a boy who's crouching in a shallow ditch, fishing something unidentifiable from the water. He nods at you like an adult, despite the fact he's chewing a reed and missing one sock. He's got his own job, possibly turnip patrol, or maybe he's just very lost. It's hard to say. This is not the France of polished cathedrals and courtly love. This is village France. That pre-dawn part of the map where everything smells faintly of soup and manure, and kids your size hold the system together in all the strange little gaps. Historians still argue whether children were formally assigned these odd jobs, or just gently nudged into them by necessity. There are few records. Peasants didn't write much down unless it was for a saint's day or a good cheese recipe, but evidence survives in letters, ledgers, and the occasional irritated sermon. Some jobs were seasonal, some were permanent, all were incredibly specific, and all were paid in, well, not always money. Sometimes it was a heel of bread, an extra sip of cider, or, if you were really lucky, a dry spot near the fire. And so, as you pass the tannery, hold your nose. The mill, wave to the sleepy apprentice. And the pigsty, avoid eye contact. You reflect on your own job. Today, you're one of the orchard criers. A highly respected position if your idea of respect involves waving sticks at birds and developing early onset hoarseness. But more on that in a moment. For now, you take in your world. The uneven fences, the blacksmith's rooster-shaped weather vane, the gaggle of geese that may or may not be plotting something. You notice how the village has its own rhythm, slower than the cities, rougher around the edges, but alive. You are a cog in this machine, small, slightly muddy, but essential. Because who else is going to chase the cat out of the flower bin? Or carry gossip between houses under the guise of errands? Or most importantly, hold the stick that keeps the door open during deliveries? It's not glamorous, but it's life. And as the sun begins to peek over the thatched roofs, warming your numb fingers just slightly, you realize today will be long, strange, probably itchy, but also sort of yours. Your job might not have a title, your wages might be vague, but you've got your place. In this foggy, fiddly little corner of medieval France, you are needed, even if it's just to keep the sparrows from eating all the cherries. The sun climbs slowly, not so much rising as reluctantly dragging itself into the sky like a sleepy blacksmith after too much mead. You trudge through dew-soaked grass toward the orchard, your breath still ghosting in the morning air. Today's job? You're a bird boy, or possibly a fruit warden, depending on whether your boss is the kind who insists on titles. Either way, your mission is simple: shout at things with wings. The orchard's only about half an acre. Plum trees, a few sour cherries, one suspiciously dead apricot. But it's guarded like a small kingdom. And you, proudly armed with a hollowed-out reed whistle and a stick that used to be a broom handle, are today's sole defender. You get there before the birds, which gives you a brief moment of triumph and a chance to stuff a fistful of wild mint leaves into your pocket. They'll help with the smell later. You pick a high spot near a pile of firewood and stand at attention, squinting into the trees. Birds. So many birds. Sparrows, starlings, jackdaws, and a few oddly smug crows. They're not subtle. You see them waiting on the fence post like they've read the same schedule as you. The moment you turn away to scratch your knee, they descend like feathery lightning. A dozen beaks deep in unripened fruit before your first, "Hey, shoo!" leaves your mouth. You wave your stick. They scatter for 5 seconds. Then they return. This is the job. Not glamorous, not even mildly effective, but necessary. The villagers can't afford netting. They certainly can't afford to lose the fruit. And so children are stationed in orchards and fields across France every spring and summer, charged with nothing less than maintaining food security using only noise, gestures, and stubbornness. Historians still argue whether bird boy duties were seasonal employment or a full-time gig. Some records show groups of children rotating in shifts. Others mention full days spent alone among the trees, trading off with older siblings. Either way, the birds never respected the schedule. You try everything. You yell, you whistle, you clang 2 sticks together. One girl in another village reportedly learned to bark like a dog. She was promoted. There were others like you, orchard criers, scare herders, even wing chasers. And yes, some were girls, though they often got bundled into side duties, watching toddlers or collecting dropped fruit while dodging wasps. You remember a boy named Hugo who once brought a wooden sword and declared war on the Beak Army. He lasted 3 hours before declaring a truce and eating most of the plums. Your best defense, honestly, is just being there. The birds know. They don't respect you, but they acknowledge your presence. You're a variable, an inconvenience. You're the reason they tilt their heads and reconsider that 4th cherry. It's a strange kind of authority. Occasionally, an adult will walk by and shout some encouragement like, "Give 'em a good screech," or "Make yourself bigger," as though either of those things will really deter a crow with an agenda. You do your best. You hop, you wave, you yell in a tone that's part warning, part existential complaint. And every now and then, it works. A flock lifts off in dramatic fashion. and you feel a rush of pride, like a knight defending a castle, a very sticky, insect-infested castle. The crows are the worst, smart, organized. You've seen them wait in shifts, rotating in and out like feathery union members. One even dropped a stone on your head once. Not hard, but pointed. Still you persist. Because at the end of the day, if the birds haven't stolen too much, you might be allowed to keep a bruised plum or two. You might get an extra bit of cheese at supper. And maybe, just maybe, you'll earn a nod of respect from the orchard's owner. That nod won't change your life, but it might warm your toes for half a minute. You take a break near the stump with the beetle colony. Someone's left a bit of bread there, probably the kid who did the morning shift. You eat it anyway. Finders keepers. Medieval ethics are flexible when you're 10. The orchard grows louder as the day wears on, not with birds, they're still flapping and sneaking, but with wind, rustling leaves, and distant village clamor. A cart creaks past. Someone's hammering metal. A woman is yelling at a goat with surprising fluency. And through it all, you continue, clapping, shouting, blowing your whistle with the breathless dedication of someone both deeply bored and strangely determined. Because this is your post. You may not wear armor, your stick may be old, but you are the thin, shouty line between fruit and feathers. And honestly, you're doing just fine. By midday, the sun has gotten serious about being in the sky. It glares down with all the gentleness of a forge bellows, turning the orchard into a slow-cooking plum sauna. You've yelled yourself hoarse, and even the birds seem tired, sitting in nearby trees giving you judgmental side eyes like restaurant patrons glaring at a waiter who forgot their soup. You're given a break. 5 minutes, unofficial, enforced only by the collapse of your knees beneath a shade tree. You chew the last of your mint leaves, which now taste mostly like dirt, and wonder what it's like to have a job that doesn't involve winged enemies and splattered fruit. Turns out, some children don't yell at birds. Some crawl inside wheels. Meet the turnspit toddlers. You've heard the stories. Maybe even seen the contraption in the kitchen of the manor down the hill. A long iron rod, skewering a haunch of meat, slowly turning above the hearth. But it's not magic. And it's not a clever adult invention. It's powered by someone your size, or smaller. The turnspit wheel is a large upright cylinder, a bit like a hamster wheel but taller and made of wood. A child climbs inside and walks. For hours. 1 foot in front of the other, eyes stinging from smoke, sweat dripping down their nose, the smell of roasting meat teasing their empty stomach. The purpose? Keep the meat turning, evenly, constantly. Because apparently in some corners of France, nothing says elegant feast like a roast rotated by a child too young to spell their own name. Historians still argue whether dogs or children were more commonly used for turnspit duty. Some noble households reportedly bred special short-legged dogs for the task. Less moral complications, more barking. But in humbler kitchens, the job often fell to whatever child wasn't already busy chasing chickens or scraping ash. The wheel is positioned above the fire, close enough to feel the heat, not close enough to burn, unless someone's clumsy or cruel, but enough to leave your face bright pink and your tunic damp from steam. You walk, you sweat, you blink through smoke and the rhythmic creak of the wheel. One girl, Jean, said she used to pretend she was powering a ship. A roast ship, she called it, heading for the port of dinner. A child with both imagination and blistered toes. Occasionally you're swapped out, maybe after an hour, maybe not. It depends on the kitchen's mood, the meat's stubbornness, and how many kids are on hand that day. No one speaks to you much. Your background noise. You are infrastructure. One cog in the great clunky stew pot that is a noble supper. And yet some kids liked it. Compared to field work, it was indoors. Compared to leech collecting, it didn't involve swamp feet. Compared to yelling at crows, at least the meat smelled good. You try not to think about that as your stomach grumbles loudly enough to scare off a nearby pigeon. It's the only food you'll smell all day, and unless someone's feeling generous, you'll be lucky to get a scrap once the noble family's eaten their fill. Sometimes, rarely, you get paid. A heel of bread, a boiled egg. Once, someone whispered about a girl who got an entire honey cake for working the wheel at a wedding. No one believed it. You imagine stepping into that wheel now. The wooden slats creak under your feet. You start walking, round and round like a little meat-powered sun turning in the kitchen sky. You're not alone. Another kid waits outside the wheel, sleepy-eyed and covered in soot. You switch places silently, like monks at prayer. There's no clock in the kitchen, no hourglass, just the roast, the smoke, and your own aching knees. And when the feast is done, you climb out, blinking, dazed, hair full of ash. No one says thank you. No one even looks. The guests are laughing. The servants are scrubbing. The meat is gone, but the wheel still turns. Tomorrow, another roast, another child. You lie back in the orchard now, your own work mercifully wheel-free. Your feet are sore from pacing, your arms tired from waving the bird stick. But at least you didn't have to crawl inside a rotating oven. The air smells like leaves and overripe plums. A breeze rustles the trees. A jackdaw flutters past with a smug look and half a cherry in its beak. You let it go. For now. Because sometimes yelling at birds beats roasting alongside them. The breeze finally picks up, shaking loose a few half-eaten leaves from the plum trees, and the orchard settles into a midday lull. Even the birds, stuffed and smug, have retreated to nearby branches for digestive gossip. You stretch your arms and squint toward the village, wondering who's got the stranger job today, and knowing full well it's probably your friend Etienne. Etienne is a page, which sounds fancy until you realize it mostly involves polishing chainmail until your knuckles go numb. He works for the local lord, one of those brooding, high-cheekbone types who owns more horses than shirts and insists on holding his sword even while eating porridge. As a page, Etienne's official job is learning the ways of chivalry. But most of his days are spent on his knees with a rag and a bucket, scrubbing metal links that have seen more rain than glory. Being a page is a sort of pre-night apprenticeship, open only to boys of slightly noble birth, or more often, the sons of families trying really hard to seem important. If you're lucky, you start around age 7, and by 14 you might be promoted to squire if you haven't drowned in a vat of helmet polish by then. Etienne says the worst part is the smell. Chainmail, once used, retains everything. Sweat, mud, bits of battlefield lunch, and the occasional snail that's crawled in during storage. And it's your job as page to clean it with water, vinegar, and relentless scrubbing. He showed you once, proudly, the red patches on his hands. War scars, he said, from the Battle of the Elbow Grease. Historians still argue whether polishing armor was the primary role of a page or just the job they complained about most. Records show duties included running messages, fetching food, brushing horses, and, importantly, standing silently nearby in case a lord needed to hand someone his glove with flair. But nothing fills the time quite like mail cleaning. The links are tiny, endless, deceptively heavy. One hauberk, just the tunic part, can weigh 20 pounds and take hours to polish. Etienne once spent an entire afternoon on a single sleeve. He said he began to dream about tiny rings clinking together, forming giant chains that wrapped around his bed and whispered, "Scrub me." You believe him. When he's not polishing, he's learning things, like how to bow properly, how to pour wine without spilling, a punishable offense, and how to recite poetry without sounding like he'd rather be chewing gravel. Sometimes he gets to practice sword drills, using a wooden blade longer than he is. But mostly, he waits. Pages wait a lot. They wait outside doors, beside horses, in muddy courtyards, in dark halls with weird echoes. They wait to be needed, spoken to, or shouted at. You visited him once during a delivery run. He was sitting cross-legged beside a stack of helmets, whispering to them like they were his only friends, which at the time they probably were. You sat together for a few minutes while he scrubbed a particularly stubborn armpit dent in a chain coif. He offered you a crust of bread. You offered him a plum you'd hidden in your tunic. Neither of you spoke much. But in the unspoken world of village children, that silence was practically a handshake. Not all pages hated it. Some dreamed of glory, of becoming squires, then knights, then someone important enough to have their armor polished by a page. The cycle of scrub. There's a strange pride in it. Even Etienne, covered in rust flakes and humility, seems to stand a little straighter when someone asks him what he does. "I'm in training," he'll say, brushing soot off his knees, "for battle." Though in truth, most of the battles he's seen involve trying not to spill soup while holding a tray with shaking arms. You glance toward the manor now, its roof glinting in the distance, and wonder if Etienne's inside, polishing something important. Or just waiting, always waiting. You pick up your stick, swat at a fly, and start pacing the orchard again. The birds are back. So is your job. But at least your arms aren't vibrating from 6 hours of armor scrubbing. And when you meet Etienne again at the well later, he'll probably laugh when you tell him about the crow who pooped on your shoulder mid-honk. You'll laugh too. Because childhood in medieval France isn't about ease or play. It's about carrying strange jobs with small hands, with pride, with jokes, with the knowledge that even the lowliest page or plum shouter is part of something bigger. And maybe one day, Etienne will get his own page. And maybe you'll finally scare off a crow for good. The sun begins its slow descent now, taking the sharp edge off the heat and casting long, slanted shadows between the trees. The orchard is golden, drowsy, and surprisingly bird-free. For once, they seem to have declared a truce. You lean against a fence post, watching a few goats nibble on someone's laundry in the distance, and think about how strange this day's been. But not nearly as strange as your cousin Margot's job. Margot, cheerful and eternally damp, is what the adults politely call a leech assistant. She collects leeches with her legs. Let that sink in. In villages across medieval France, leeches were medical currency, used to balance humors, treat fevers, or simply scare illness away with horror. Doctors and barbers relied on them. Nobles kept jars of them. Apothecaries paid for them. And someone with a strong stomach and preferably small ankles, had to gather them. Enter the children. Specifically, leech-collecting children, who were tasked with wading into shallow, stagnant ponds. And waiting. That's it. You walk in, stand still, and wait for slimy little creatures to mistake you for breakfast. Margot says the first few seconds are the worst. The tickle. the first tug, the weird way they wiggle under your skin like a bad secret. But after a while, she says, you stop noticing. It's like being nibbled by very determined shadows. Historians still argue whether leech gathering was a formal assignment or more of an if you want to eat, go stand in the swamp situation. Some abbeys kept records of leech quotas. Others mention it only in passing, as if it were too common to need explanation. But Margot does it twice a week, barefoot, hem of her skirt tied up, standing in chilly green water while a grumpy priest oversees the process from a dry log nearby, occasionally calling out, "Don't wiggle, they scare off if you wiggle." Once the leeches latch on, Margot plucks them off one by one and drops them into a clay jar. She's got a trick for it. Flick and twist, never pull straight, or they'll leave part of themselves behind. Which is a sentence you never want to hear during lunch. There are risks, of course. Infection, dizziness, the occasional water snake. But Margot doesn't mind. She sings little songs while she works, most of them about leeches and how they probably deserve better press. Her favorite is, "Little worm with a greedy mouth, take your snack and slither south." She taught it to you once while showing off a particularly plump specimen she'd named Alphonse. You didn't eat lunch that day. Some children are only temporary collectors, sent when the adult workforce is busy or when the demand for leeches spikes, usually during epidemics. But others, like Margot, become semi-professional. She even keeps a small net for rogue swimmers, and once received a goose feather as a tip from an impressed merchant. Leech collection had its own tools too. Shallow scoops made from horn, special clay pots sealed with moss. Some children were given little belts to tie up their skirts or trousers, embroidered with charms to keep the blood from fleeing. Margot wears hers like a badge of honor. You tried it once? For a minute, just a single minute. The water was cold. The mud tried to eat your toes. And the first leech that brushed your ankle felt like the ghost of an eel with a grudge. You screamed, fell over, and were banned from the pond for disrupting the harvest. Margot never lets you forget it. Still, you admire her. She's got the kind of calm you wish you had when chasing crows or dodging plums. She says the trick is to pretend you're part of the pond. Still water draws the most leeches, she says with a shrug, so I become the water. That sort of talk makes the priest nervous. You sit now, your back against the orchard fence, imagining her knee-deep in her green kingdom, surrounded by reeds, mosquitoes, and her jar of quiet, wriggling prizes. There's something noble in it, in a weird way, something steady, purposeful. She's not yelling, she's not spinning meat, she's just standing, still and useful, while the world nibbles at her. And when she comes home, muddy, scratched, arms full of jars, she always brings a smile. And a handful of violets picked from the edge of the pond just because she thought they looked lonely. You sigh. The air smells like fallen fruit and clover now. The birds are resting. Your stick leans against the tree, momentarily forgotten. And far away, in a pond rimmed with weeds and silence, your cousin stands perfectly still and listens for the soft, unmistakable kiss of a job well done. The evening light spills into the orchard like warm milk, softening the edges of everything. The trees, the grass, even your own aching shoulders. You lean against a post, toes twitching in your worn shoes, and think about how everyone, it seems, has their job in this medieval patchwork. Yours involves shouting, Etienne's involves scrubbing, Margot's involves leeches. And then there's Bastien, who walks goats. Not just any goats, important goats. You remember the first time you saw Bastien on duty? Marching up the lane with a stiff back and a knotted rope in each hand, leading two shaggy, snorting, very self-important goats toward the pasture like they were guests of honor. One wore a ribbon. The other wore a smug expression that has haunted you ever since. You assumed Bastion was playing, a child dragging animals around for fun. But no, this was a job. An actual, assigned, semi-ceremonial job. He is, as he insists, the escort of noble goats. Historians still debate how common this role was. In regions of France where goat milk was prized for its medicinal or symbolic value, especially among noble families who liked to claim their milk came from pure stock, goats were sometimes treated as minor celebrities, and that meant someone had to walk them. Enter Bastion. He's about your age but carries himself like a small mayor. He wears a satchel with salt cubes, a cloth for polishing hooves, and a wooden whistle in case one goat gets too independent. His goats, Mathilde and Blaze, are prized for their calm tempers and luxurious coats. Which is hilarious to you, because Blaze once kicked over a wine barrel and chased a bishop into a pond. Still, Bastion does his job. Twice a day, he walks them from the manor to the far pasture and back. He greets every passer-by. He tips his head to chickens. He bows slightly to trees that look older than usual. You walked with him once, just for the company. He was all business. No plucking wildflowers, he said. Matilda gets jealous. Don't whistle. Blaze takes it as a challenge. Walk between them, not behind. If they kick each other, you don't want to be the bread in that goat sandwich. You obeyed, of course, because while you might outrun a crow or sneak an apple, you do not mess with noble goats. Bastion has learned to anticipate their moods. He knows when Blaze is going to fake a limp, usually for attention, and when Matilda wants to stop and chew bark for a full 5 minutes. He keeps a little bundle of lavender in his pocket for calming the ladies, and once serenaded them with a lullaby when thunder spooked them on the return walk. He doesn't mind being seen either. In fact, he thrives on the attention. The villagers wave, children salute. Even the local priest once murmured something about Bastion having an unusually regal stride. At the pasture, he ties the goats near the cleanest clover, watches them nibble like royalty, and makes sure they don't wander into the cart ruts or, heaven forbid, tangle their ropes. And when it's time to return, he whistles, not sharply, but with a kind of musical pride, and the goats trot after him like fluffy little dignitaries. You're not sure whether he loves the goats or just the ceremony of it all. Maybe both. But his devotion is undeniable. Some days, he gets extra milk as payment. Once, the manor cook gave him a honey biscuit. But mostly, it's about status. Bastion is trusted. He's seen. He's the one who knows where the goats are, how they feel, and whether their hooves need trimming. He's even got a story he tells every year at the summer festival about how he once defended Blaze from a runaway cart using only a turnip sack and his own glare. The story gets longer every year. The cart gets faster. The turnip sack more magical. You don't mind. Bastion's earned his legend. You lie back in the grass now, watching the shadows lengthen as the sun sinks behind the trees. A few bees hum lazily nearby. One last bird cackles from a distant roof. You think about what it means to have a strange job. Something odd, oddly vital, that no one else can or wants to do. Shouting at birds, scrubbing armor, tempting leeches, parading goats, none of it feels noble, and yet somehow, in this crooked little village world, it all matters. Especially to the goats. Especially to Bastion. And as you drift halfway into a daydream, you imagine him now, silhouetted against the setting sun, cloak fluttering behind him, 2 goats trotting in unison at his sides like knights returning from battle. goat escort, defender of dignity, hero of hooves, and tomorrow he'll do it all again. The last warmth of the day clings to the orchard leaves like honey, and everything smells faintly of apples, dust, and whatever Margot stepped in earlier. You're done yelling at birds, for now. Your throat is scratchy, your stick is splintered, and the jackdaws have declared a smug victory by roosting just out of rock-throwing range. You shuffle back into the village just in time to hear the dunung of the church bell. It echoes across the fields, through the alleyways, up the hills. But it wasn't rung by a priest. No, today's bell ringer is your friend Luke. Luke lives in the bell tower. Well, not officially, but if there's a child in this village who's more associated with ropes, pigeons, and very sudden loud noises, it's him. He's one of the children of the bell tower. It's a weird job, equal parts chore, punishment, and strange rite of passage. In many French towns during the Middle Ages, church bells had to be rung at regular times for prayers, warnings, weather, and occasionally when someone's cow wandered into the wrong yard again. But ringing those bells took effort. You needed someone small, fast, and not afraid of heights or angry doves. Enter Luke. He's lean, dirt-kneed, and permanently dusty. His hair smells like rope. His ears ring even when he's not near the bells. He talks slightly louder than necessary, but he's good at his job. Climbing the tower is half the battle. The stairs are steep, uneven, and entirely haunted, probably. Then there's the trap door, the ladder, and finally, the rickety platform where the bell ropes hang like sleepy snakes, coiled and swaying in the dim light. Luke lives for it. "I can feel the whole village listening," he once said, grinning like a maniac after a successful noon ring. "It's like being the heartbeat of the world." You believe him. Sort of. His job isn't just ringing. He also has to keep the pigeons away, which is harder than you'd think. The birds nest in the eaves, cooing and pooping, and occasionally pecking at Luke's lunch. He once trained a cat to live in the bell tower as a deterrent, but the cat quickly realized Luke's bed of hay was warmer than hunting birds and retired early. The bells themselves are massive, giant, soot-black behemoths that swing like sleeping giants when called upon, and calling them is no easy task. The ropes are thick, frayed, and temperamental. Pulling one wrong can tangle the whole mechanism, or worse, swing you upward like a human fishhook. Luke has been flung more than once. He calls it aerial devotion. Historians still argue whether children were regularly employed in such duties or simply voluntold by busy clergy. In small towns, especially ones low on healthy adult labor, the answer seems to be yes. Sometimes they were paid in coin, sometimes in bread. Once Luke says he got a fish pie. Cold, but still. There's a system to it. Matins at dawn, sext at midday, vespers at twilight. Each ring has a rhythm, a count, a purpose. You're not just yanking a rope, you're telling time, guiding prayer, and warning about anything from storms to the mayor's goat escaping again. Luke takes it seriously. He even wears a special belt with a pouch for chalk to mark the rope, flint for lighting his lantern, and mysteriously, a hard-boiled egg he never eats but always carries. You've stopped asking. Being the bell child means waking early, climbing high, and occasionally being struck by an owl mid-swing. It means knowing that the entire village depends on a sound that begins in your hands. And it means solitude. Luke spends hours up there, especially on feast days or when storms roll in. He says the view is worth it. "You can see the river," he whispers once, "and the way the wind moves across the barley like it's thinking about something important." You visited once. The climb nearly ended you. The stairs creaked, the ladder wobbled, and when the bell rang while you were mid-climb, You screamed and nearly declared eternal devotion to silence. Luke just laughed. "It's not so bad," he said, swinging his legs from the platform. "You get used to the pigeons. Eventually they think you're one of them." You believe him. He does walk with a slight waddle now. And when the bell rings again, at twilight, you stop mid-step in the orchard and listen. The sound rolls over the village like warm smoke. Kids stop playing. Goats pause chewing. Even the birds seem to hold their breath for a moment. That's Luke. That's his work. Unseen, but heard by all. You wonder what it's like to live so high above the rooftops. To wake with the wind and sleep with feathers in your hair. To be the voice of the village, even if no one sees your face. It's a strange job, a solitary one. But as the final chime echoes off the hills and the crows caw in lazy harmony, you can't help but smile. Because even in a world of goat escorts and leech collectors, someone's got to ring the bell. And Luke was born for it. The light fades faster now, slipping behind the rooftops like it's late for supper. The village exhales. Fires are lit. Doors creak shut. And somewhere in the distance, someone's whistling a tune that sounds vaguely like, "Please let the cow stay tied up this time." You make your way toward the edge of the village, where the road narrows and the houses lean a little closer together, as if swapping secrets. This is where you'll find Renee and Jules, two of the smallest, dirtiest, and most quietly determined workers you've ever known. Their job? They are potsherd sweepers and alley rakers, which is a medieval way of saying they clean up everything nobody else wants to touch. This isn't glamorous like bell ringing, or oddly noble like goat escorting. It's crawling through back alleys at sunset kind of work. They are the unsung underfoot maintenance crew of medieval sanitation. And their tools? A broken broom, a small rake, and most importantly, feet that fit into tight spaces. Renee, the older of the two, wears an apron that used to be white, but is now a proud, multi-toned map of everything she's swept. Jules is mostly elbows and confidence, his tunic several sizes too large, sleeves rolled so many times they could function as makeshift mittens. Their job begins just as most others wind down. That's when the village mess piles up. Shards of cracked pots tossed from windows, animal bones from supper, fish heads, cabbage leaves, mystery mush, and, occasionally, something that looks like it might have once been soup or an opinion. They start with the alleys, narrow stone-lined walkways between houses that are dark even in daylight. Jules goes in first, a little rake scraping rhythmically, while Renee follows with a sack and muttered commentary about people who think the alley is their personal compost heap. Some villages have official cleaners, of course, usually older kids or adults paid in coppers. But in places like this, where the coin is tighter than a cheesecloth knot, it's often children who take over, especially if they're nimble and not too fussy about smells. Historians still argue whether children in this role were part of organized town sanitation or simply tolerated as they tried to earn scraps. Some towns had rules about what could be dumped and where. Others took a looser approach. Looser meaning good luck, and may the wind blow the smell away. What makes this job strange isn't just the task itself, it's the amount of effort Renee and Jules put into it. They have a route, a routine, a kind of choreography. Renee checks windowsills for new shards, then Jules rakes them into a pile. She sweeps, he bags. He sings badly. She hums, off-key. They argue about who gets to use the nice broom handle. It's teamwork, deeply scented and entirely essential. Sometimes they get paid, usually in bits of old bread, once in a small wedge of soft cheese, and occasionally in a whispered thank you from someone too embarrassed to say it louder. Once, they even found a coin stuck in a crack between the cobbles. They spent it on raisins and instantly regretted the decision. But the real reward, according to Renee, is not slipping on goat bones in the morning. Which fair? There's a kind of pride in it, even if no one sees them. Even if the broom gives splinters and the rake is half a fork, they're the invisible cleanup crew of medieval life, making sure the pathways are clear, the chickens don't eat something suspicious, and the toddlers don't wander into a puddle that's more soup than soil. You've helped them once or twice, usually when the smell becomes too much for two noses alone. They gave you a spare rag to tie around your face, and Renee handed you a broken-handled scoop with a solemn welcome to the crew. That night you raked your first alley. It was terrible. The rake caught on every stone. The soup mystery glorp soaked through your shoes. A cat swiped at your broom, and someone dropped an eggshell from a second-story window that just missed your head. But when you finished, and the alley was clear and swept and oddly peaceful under the stars, you understood. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. You wave to them now as you pass the bakery. Jules gives you a flour-dusted salute. Renee nods without stopping her sweep. They're halfway through their evening shift, debating whether a dried-up thing they found is part of a beat or part of something better left unnamed. They don't expect praise or even recognition, but you see them, and more than that, you appreciate them. Because in a world where people throw bones out the window and call it tidying, someone has to pick them up, and that someone is probably under 4 feet tall and knows more about decomposing vegetables than you'll ever want to learn. The streetlights, well, torches and sconces, begin to flicker to life one by one, their flames dancing like tipsy fireflies. The village begins its gentle hum toward sleep, doors creaking closed, shutters clattering softly, and footsteps fading into the hush of evening. You, however, are still out and about, because tonight you're visiting two of the strangest little workers in town. They don't sweep alleys. They don't yell at birds or climb towers or lead goats in slow procession. No, Eloi and Mireille have the unique and somewhat spooky title of Tooth Fairy apprentices, though that's more of a nickname the village children gave them. Their real task? Collecting bones. Not bones from butchers, although that's part of it. Not bones from kitchens, though they keep an eye out for those too. No, Eloi and Mireille's job lies somewhere in the strange gray area between sanitation, superstition, and scavenging. Historians still argue whether the practice was rooted more in practicality or ritual. In some rural areas of medieval France, bones were gathered for reuse, ground into fertilizer, boiled for glue, carved into tools or buttons. But in others, there was an odd blend of spiritual reverence and fear. Unburied bones were bad luck. Forgotten teeth might invite curses. Discarded knuckle joints could, under the wrong moon, attract things that really ought to stay in folk tales. Which is why some villages quietly recruited the smallest, quickest children to collect them. Eloi carries a pouch of linen tied to his belt. Mireille wears a scarf around her head and a tiny knife carved from bone itself, a gift from her grandfather, who had strong opinions about keeping skeletons where they belong. They start their rounds just after supper. It's easier when people are inside, and it gives them first pick at the day's discard piles. Kitchens toss out all sorts of things: chicken backs, sheep knuckles, fish skulls. Sometimes human teeth pulled that day by the village barber surgeon and casually flung into the street like particularly cursed breadcrumbs. Eloi and Mireille picked them all up, carefully, respectfully, and always with whispered little rhymes, protection charms taught by their grandmothers and passed down through generations like secret passwords. Bones for buttons, bones for beads, bones for dreams and buried seeds. You asked once what they do with them. They showed you bone piles, carefully sorted by size and shape, hidden in baskets behind the tanner's shed. Some are sold to traveling merchants, some to local craftspeople, some to the apothecary who insists ground shin bone mixed with sage can cure anything from nightmares to hiccups, and some are just returned. You're not sure what that means. They wouldn't say. They just looked at each other and nodded solemnly, like that made it less creepy. Sometimes they find a tooth and pause. Still has the root, Eloy murmurs, holding it up to the torchlight. Too fresh, Mireille replies, wrapping it in cloth before tucking it away. We'll bury it tonight. You don't ask where. Not all their work is grim. There's a bit of joy in it, too. Mireille once found a pig's jawbone that looked exactly like her uncle's grin. Eloy keeps a sheep vertebra on a string and calls it his guardian bone. They're oddly cheerful, in the way kids sometimes are when their whole world is strange and they've decided to just go along with it. They have rules. Never touch a bone with bare hands if it's still warm. Always give thanks, even if it's to a fish head. If you find something that whispers, leave it. Just walk away. You once accompanied them on a round, clutching a cloth bag and trying not to trip over your own curiosity. The first few bones were fine. Chicken wings, a lamb scapula, even a goose beak that looked surprisingly philosophical. But then came the teeth. So many teeth. Tiny, yellowed, slightly curved. Some whole, some chipped, one with a bit of twine still wrapped around it like it had been tied for luck. You asked where they came from. Mireille just said, villagers don't always keep track of their mouths. You haven't chewed bread quite the same way since. They finished their rounds just before curfew, leaving small, empty baskets outside the carpenter's door and the weaver's fence, signals that the harvest is complete. In return, they sometimes receive bits of twine, slivers of soap, or, on lucky nights, a tiny candle stub to light their way home. It's not a job most kids would want, but Eloy and Mireille don't mind. They say they like being the quiet part of the village, the part that slips through cracks and keeps things tidy beneath the surface. They say bones don't lie. Bones remember. You're not sure what that means either. But as they wave goodnight and disappear down the alley with their pouches of careful clinks, you feel a strange comfort, like someone's watching the forgotten things, the discarded, the things left behind. And really, what could be more important than that? The village has taken on that quiet, whispering stillness that only comes just before full dark. Smoke rises from chimney pots and lazy ribbons, lanterns glow behind warped glass, and the last clinks of dishes and mutters of bedtime arguments echo through stone walls. But over by the weaver's shed, where cloth is dyed and cloaks are finished, the work isn't done. Because here, soaking knee-deep in murky tubs and squelching across soggy mats, are the cloak soakers of Lyon, a grimy little team of children with wrinkled feet, powerful calves, and a scent that could knock over a cow at 20 paces. You may not envy their job, but you've certainly noticed the results. Back in medieval France, cloaks were essential. Warm, heavy, and impressively multi-purpose. A good cloak could be a blanket, a pillow, a baby sling, a grain sack, or a raincoat, depending on the mood of the weather and the desperation of the wearer. But before they became the flowing garments of noble portraits or the soggy wraps of tired travelers, those cloaks had to be softened. And softened cloaks meant soaking. The cloth, often coarse wool, arrived from the weaver stiff as bark and scratchy as vengeance. So it was soaked in a mixture of water, soapwort, animal urine, yes, really, and sometimes even fermented lye, all of which needed to be trampled, twisted, and rubbed by human feet, small feet, preferably belonging to children, because children, unlike full-grown cloth stompers, could balance in the slippery vats without cracking a hip. Plus, their weight wasn't enough to damage the fibers. And, though no adult said this aloud, they were cheap, fast, and had nowhere else to be. So, the children soaked. Every evening, after the dyes had dried and the fire had been banked, they'd gather near the tubs, 3 large barrels set into the earth and filled with cloudy liquid that steamed faintly in the cold. You've tried it once, or rather, been volunteered by your aunt when she needed someone tired enough to stop bothering the chickens. 1 foot in, and the smell hit you like a wet slap. The water was warm, yes, but also alive. Not with creatures exactly, just with layers. Layers of old soap, bits of wool fluff, flecks of dye, hints of goat, foot, ash, and the ghost of every cloak ever soaked before. But the soakers didn't flinch. They climbed in, hitched up their skirts or rolled their trousers, and began the slow, steady stomp of the wool dancers. Right foot, left foot, press, twist, humming or bickering depending on the mood. One girl, Leia, claimed she could tell how expensive a cloak would be based on the way it sloshed. The good ones make a swishing sound, she'd say, wringing out a sleeve like it owed her money. The cheap ones just sort of gurgle like they've already given up. Historians still argue whether these children were formally apprenticed to the cloth guilds or simply part of an informal labor force. Some towns had specific age requirements, others didn't ask. In Lyon, where textile trade was booming, entire families worked in wool. And the children? They soaked. They also rinsed. After the foot stomping came the clean water wash, where cloaks were dipped again to remove the smell of whatever horrific potion had just softened them. This part, ironically, was colder and even more unpleasant. The trick, you're told, is to not think about it. Don't think about your freezing feet. Don't think about the smell. Don't think about how your fingertips are now permanently wrinkled like ancient walnuts. Just move. Press. Twist. Press. Twist. Sometimes they told stories to pass the time. One boy, Henri, was a master of the dramatic death scene. He'd act out being swallowed by a cloak monster mid-stomp, earning giggles and occasional soap bubbles up the nose. Others took it more seriously. Jeanette, the eldest, treated soaking like sacred duty. If the cloak itches, she once declared, the knight complains. If the knight complains, someone loses a job. And if we lose this job, we go back to beat pulling. Is that what you want? No one wanted that. The payoff wasn't always great. Maybe a crust of bread. Maybe a pinch of salt. If someone was in a good mood, a bit of hot broth served in a chipped mug that tasted faintly of radish and iron. But there was pride in it. The soakers knew every cloak that passed through their tubs came out better, softer, warmer, ready for whatever rain or war or goat-herding life had in store. You pass by now, catching sight of them in the flickering firelight. Leia is wringing out a hood. Henri is standing dramatically in one of the tubs, arms raised as if commanding the very water to obey. Jeanette, ever practical, is quietly folding the finished cloaks on a drying rack that creaks like an old man's knees. They look tired, damp, and oddly peaceful. You wave. Leia splashes you. You deserve it, because while you've been arguing with crows and dodging plums, they've been elbow deep in the warm, woolly swamp of cloak preparation. Different work, same village, Same sense of small hands holding big responsibilities. And as you head home, your own tunic damp with orchard dew, you realize that behind every warm cloak in this town, every blanket, hood, and riding wrap, there's a child who stomped their feet for hours, whistling through wrinkled toes and laughing over the splash of something that definitely wasn't dye. The stars have started their quiet parade overhead, one by one blinking into view like shy fireflies. A faint breeze rustles through the alleyways now, stirring up the smells of hearth smoke, drying herbs, wet wool, and bread crusts forgotten on windowsills. You're meandering toward the far edge of the village now, where the houses begin to thin out and the night grows quieter. This is where you'll find Theodore and Lucy working their odd little night shift. Theodore is the beetle boy. Lucy is the candle girl. Their job? Very straightforward, very odd, and very important in the flickering rhythm of medieval life. Let's start with Lucy because you've seen her around before, usually in the evenings, skittering between homes with a box of rushlights under one arm and a soot-streaked cloth in the other. She's one of the youngest candle tenders in town. Her job is to keep flames alive. Candles, especially in smaller homes, are precious. They're expensive, melt too quickly, and seem to gutter out just when you're mid-toothbrushing or mid-prayer. Some wealthier villagers have oil lamps or rushlight holders. Most just light whatever wick they can find and hope the draft doesn't blow it out too soon. That's where Lucy comes in. Every evening she makes her rounds to certain houses, mostly elderly villagers, sometimes those too ill or busy to tend their own flames. She checks wicks, scrapes excess wax, trims the ends, and, most importantly, shields them from gusts with her smoke cloth. If the candle's gone out, she relights it. If the wax has flooded the holder, she digs it out with a stick carved from bone and mutters about needing better molds. She doesn't say much. Lucy is all focus. One hand on the flame, one on her cloth. You once made the mistake of joking that she looked like she was petting fire, and she blinked slowly, then replied, "I do. Fire is shy." You've never lit a match the same way since. Historians still argue whether children truly held such delicate roles or were simply helpers for adult candle makers. In towns like yours, though, where every small task was someone's whole world, it makes perfect sense that a nimble child with steady hands would become the keeper of light. Lucy takes her job seriously. She's been known to scold adults who leave candles near curtains or set them too close to sleeping dogs. She claims to have saved 4 homes from burning down. You believe at least 2. But as important as Lucy is, even she can't work without Theodore. Theodore's job is a little less graceful, a little more squishy. He's the beetle boy. Not the bug collector kind, no. His job is to squash them. More specifically, to keep insects from crawling into candles, wicks, and wax stores, especially overnight when the warmth of old tallow draws the hungry little creatures in like a buffet line. Armed with a flat stone, a bundle of sage for smoke, and what he proudly calls his squish cloth, Theodore prowls the base of storage shelves, corners of kitchens, and any wall that's warm enough to tempt crawling things. He knows them all by name, the redbacks, the jumpers, the nibblers, and the ones with far too many legs to be socially acceptable. He doesn't kill indiscriminately, just the wax thieves, the ones that melt holes in candles or nibble rushlights to powder. He says it's a matter of balance. "We leave the spider near the oven," he tells you one evening, "because he eats the ones I don't like." Beetle duty, while weird, is considered surprisingly valuable. You've heard adults say that Theodore has the best eyes in the village. You've seen him lean in close to a candle rack, sniff the air, and mutter beetle droppings like some medieval Sherlock Holmes. He keeps a tally in chalk on the beam outside the candle shed, small X's for every pest he's dispatched. Some weeks there are dozens, other times just a few. Once he claimed to have fought a wax dragon behind the bakehouse. The story changed slightly each retelling, but it always ended with, "And then I sat on it." Together, Lucy and Theodore form an unlikely team. She preserves the flame. He guards the wax. And in a world where one candle can mean the difference between peace and panic, that's no small feat. You remember once watching them work in tandem. A rushlight had sputtered out in the baker's home, and Lucy was relighting it while Theodore crouched nearby, poking at a beetle with a stick. Neither said a word, just light, scrape, squish, blow, and a little sigh of satisfaction as the glow returned to the corner of the kitchen. There's something comforting about that. The idea that even in the smallest, strangest jobs, keeping a candle alive or defending it from intruders, there is purpose, rhythm, quiet pride. You pass them now, rounding the far side of the candle shed. Lucy nods to you without breaking stride. Theodore offers you a crushed bug on a leaf for study, which you politely decline. They disappear down the path, two silhouettes framed by firelight and the faint crackle of lanterns being refilled. She walks softly. He walks like someone ready to pounce. Both walk like they own the night. And for this one weird sliver of medieval village life, they do. By now, the village is tucked into its nighttime rhythm. Firewood crackles in hearths, dogs groan as they settle down, and the occasional giggle from a sibling squabble seeps through thin walls like warm soup through bread. But outside, in the silence between candlelit windows, another small figure perches like a gargoyle on a wooden stool. That would be Alain, the window watcher. You've seen him plenty, often before you even realize it. He's perched in the same spot every evening just after dusk, near the front of the guildmaster's house, cloaked in a moth-bitten blanket and staring hard into the distance like he's waiting for a prophecy to arrive. But Alain isn't gazing at stars or searching for owls. His job is to watch the road, specifically the road that curves into the village from the east, well trodden by merchants, messengers, nobles with oversized hats, and occasionally angry neighbors from the next hamlet over. When someone approaches, he's supposed to call out, loud, clear, and with exactly enough drama to stir interest but not panic. "Approaching guest!" he'll shout, if it's someone bearing gifts or news. "Traveler in red," if the cloak is bright and suspiciously clean. "Goat cart incoming," if it's, well, a goat cart. Not every alert has to be poetic. Historians still argue whether jobs like Alain's were formalized roles or simply the result of bored adults appointing observant children to yell things for them. But in smaller towns, especially ones near trade routes or bandit-prone woods, the need for a lookout was very real. And if that lookout happened to be 3 feet tall with a voice like a crow caught in a kettle, so be it. Alain takes the job seriously. He arrives before curfew, brings his own stool, hand-carved with initials and suspicious teeth marks, and wraps himself in his watching blanket, a threadbare wool sheet with 2 small eye holes cut for extra mystery. He keeps notes, too, not on parchment, but in the dirt with a stick. He scratches crude symbols for horse, cart, boots, and even hat size, which he claims is a critical marker of danger. You asked him once what happens if he falls asleep. "I don't," he said flatly. "The road watches me." "You didn't sleep well that night." It's not just travelers he's watching for. Alain also monitors for sneaky chickens, unaccompanied children after dark, and, most importantly, the sheriff's brother-in-law, who tends to show up unannounced and complain about the smell of the village cheese. When something really interesting happens, Alain sounds the urgent tap, a rhythmic thump on the shutters of the mayor's house. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2 more, like a musical code. If you ever hear it, someone important or annoying is definitely approaching. Then there are the false alarms. One time, Alain saw a bush rustle dramatically and shouted, "Mystery intruder!" It turned out to be a hedgehog. Another evening, he rang the urgent tap 3 times in a row for what turned out to be a cow wearing a festive wreath. No one was mad. They even gave him a small pie afterward, for courage. But there are tense moments, too. Once, a group of cloaked figures arrived just past sunset, and Alain's warning gave the townsfolk just enough time to close the gates and send someone to fetch the reeve. They were harmless, it turned out, just pilgrims on a detour, but still. That night, he was treated like a miniature hero. There's an art to his work. It's not just about yelling. It's about tone, timing, observation. "See the way the traveler holds the reins," he once told you. "Tense? Probably hiding something. Loose? Probably drunk." He knows the tread of carts, the glint of polished boots, and which types of hats mean taxes are about to be discussed. Spoiler, it's always the tall, pointy ones. And he's not alone. Some nights he trains apprentices, tiny, fidgety kids who sit beside him for 10 minutes before falling asleep or asking too many questions. Alain is patient but stern. No snacks on duty. No guessing, only reporting. No shouting unless you mean it. You once tried the job yourself, sat on the stool, watched the road, whispered, "Approaching goose," when something waddled out of the fog. Alain, unimpressed, tapped your shoulder and whispered, "That's a duck." You never recovered from the shame. He's out tonight, of course. You spot him on his stool, legs swinging slightly, blanket draped like a cape. You wave. He doesn't wave back. His hands are busy mimicking binoculars with 2 bread crusts. You admire that. The dedication, the silliness. Because in this patchwork village where everyone's got some peculiar responsibility, polishing armor, stomping cloaks, counting beetles, someone has to be the eyes, the warning bell, the steady voice in the dark. And tonight, as a trader's lantern bobs in the distance, you hear it again. Approaching cart, 1 horse, looks grumpy, and you know all is well. You know all. The stars have taken full control of the sky now, forming constellations that look suspiciously like goats, turnips, and the face of the priest when he loses at dice. The village sleeps, or tries to. Soft snoring, creaking beds, the occasional grumble from someone arguing with a blanket. But just beyond the square, down near the community oven, someone else is still very much awake. That someone is Emilienne, and her job is as strange as it is sticky. She is the yeast keeper. Yes, you heard that right. In a village where everyone bakes, daily, desperately, and often badly, yeast is precious. Wild yeast doesn't always cooperate, and store-bought leavening is the stuff of faraway merchants and nobles with delicate appetites. So the real secret behind good bread? The starter. A living, bubbling, breathing blob of fermented dough passed from baker to baker, fed like a pet, sung to like a baby, and feared like a particularly moody goat. And who keeps it alive? Emilienne. She's no older than you, but somehow carries the weight of 100 loaves on her narrow shoulders. She lives in a tiny loft above the bakehouse, where the air constantly smells like flour, ash, and panic. In a corner of her room, nestled beside the chimney for warmth, sits the jar. It's not labeled. It doesn't need to be. Everyone in the village knows that jar. It contains the mother, a lump of sour, sticky, living yeast, kept warm, damp, and fed on schedule. It gurgles sometimes, hiccups. Once it escaped its jar and ate a sock. The sock was never recovered. Historians still argue whether medieval communities formally assigned yeast-tending roles to specific individuals, or whether it was simply a passed-down household duty. In your village, it's been Emilienne's job since her older sister ran off with a spice merchant and left the starter unattended for 48 tragic hours. The bread still hasn't forgiven her. Emilienne has rules. Feed the starter in the morning, check the bubbles by midday, whisk it gently at dusk, and never, under any circumstances, allow the jar to go cold. She keeps it wrapped in a wool sleeve, nested in moss, and set near a tiny clay lamp she refills twice a day. On particularly cold nights, she sings to it. Her lullaby, a soft little chant that includes words like rise, crust, and golden-hearted flower friend. You tried humming it once. The dough you were working with exploded. She doesn't let others touch the jar, not even her grandmother. If someone really needs to use the starter for a big bake, say for a festival or a wedding, Emilienne will carry it herself with the gravity of a royal escort. She wears gloves. The jar travels in a basket lined with felt and chicken feathers. People bow. She does not smile. You helped her once, or tried to. She let you stir, just once. The starter gurgled ominously and refused to rise for 3 full days after. She said it was because you smelled like apples and crow feathers. You still don't know if that was a compliment. Beyond maintenance, Emilienne also judges dough, not officially. But if she walks past your rising bread and sniffs once, grimaces, and walks on, that's it. The bread is cursed. Start again. Bury it if you must. Once she saved the village from disaster when she noticed the communal batch had been overfed and was beginning to bubble too quickly. It's plotting, she whispered. It wants to be cake. That night, she stayed up until dawn, whispering sour nothings into the bowl and coaxing it back into docile breadness. The yeast obeys her, and so does the village. Sometimes she receives gifts, a honeycomb here, a carved spoon there. Once, the tanner's boy gave her a small stone shaped like a loaf. She keeps it by the jar, a reminder that even rocks know their place. Not many children would take on such a role, part baker, part biologist, part whispered folklore. But Emilienne walks in flour-dusted silence, eyes always scanning for signs of over-fermenting doom. She knows the starter is alive. She knows its moods. She once claimed it dreamed of becoming a castle. You didn't ask for details. You pass by the bakehouse now and see her light still flickering through the shutter. She's there, hunched over the jar, testing texture, muttering math, maybe humming that lullaby about golden crusts and warm bellies. She might never swing a sword or chase a crow, but every soft heel of bread, every crusty roll, every little bite of warmth in this village begins with her and her squishy, snorting, slightly judgmental jar, and honestly, that's power. The night air wraps around you now like a wool cloak left too long by the fire, warm in patches, scratchy in others, and carrying the scent of smoke, moss, and mystery. You're not sure what hour it is, but you don't need a bell or a sundial. You only have to listen. There it is again, the soft, rhythmic shuff, shuff, shuff sound echoing between stone walls like someone sweeping but not really cleaning. That's how you know Claudine is at work. Claudine is the dust counter. And no, you're not mishearing that. Not dust sweeper, not chimney cleaner, a dust counter. She walks the village after dark, barefoot, holding a long stick with little bells tied near the end and a pouch full of tiny chalk pieces in her apron. Her task? To mark the places where dust has returned. See, in this part of France, in this particular village, there's a long-held belief that dust is not just a household nuisance. It's a signal, a message, sometimes of weather, sometimes of misfortune. Occasionally, according to Claudine's grandmother, of ghostly interference. So Claudine was given the task of checking the floors. Each evening after the last sweepers have hung up their brooms, she begins her route. Starting from the church steps, she moves slowly through the streets, stopping at thresholds, corners, even windowsills, tapping once with her bell stick and bending down to inspect. If she finds a layer of dust thicker than a grain's width, she marks it with chalk, a little spiral for ordinary dust, a cross for ash, and a curious looped triangle for the kind she says smells wrong. You've smelled it. She's not wrong. Claudine isn't loud, isn't flashy. She's the opposite of your friend who bangs on bells or the boy who yells about traveling goats. She moves like mist, silent but steady, and yet everyone watches her markings. In the morning, adults lean over thresholds and mutter, "Spiral again. Might be time to replace the thatch." Or, "Cross? Who burned something last night?" And if the looped triangle shows up, well, no one opens that window for 3 days. Historians still argue whether dust marking was a real medieval practice or just a regional superstition, but oral records suggest it was a thing, at least in smaller towns. Dust, after all, was one of the few things available to absolutely everyone. And when you don't have thermometers or clocks or even reliable shoes, you learn to read your environment a little more creatively. Claudine takes it seriously. She even has a special dusting pouch filled with tiny spoons, a magnifying lens she swears works better at night, and a locket containing a pinch of grandmother's dust, a mysterious relic from her family's original broom cupboard. She doesn't explain it. You don't ask. Once she caught you throwing flour on a neighbor's doorstep for fun. She stared at you for a full 10 seconds before calmly drawing a triangle and walking away. You didn't sleep well that night. She doesn't just count dust, she predicts it. She can walk into a home, look at the way light hits the corner of a rug, and tell you whether it'll need sweeping tomorrow. She once told the butcher to expect soot under his counter. The next morning, a chimney bird had knocked ash through the flue. She's not exactly feared, but she's respected. When Claudine walks by, even the rowdiest children tuck their feet under themselves. No one wants a triangle near their porch. You see her now emerging from a shadowed alley. She pauses at the baker's stoop, kneels, and presses a fingertip to the stones. She inspects. She frowns. She draws a small spiral with her chalk, taps her stick once on the door frame, and moves on. She doesn't say a word. And somehow, that silence says everything. Her route is long. It loops through the whole village, even the outer barns and the animal pens. Some nights she hums to herself, little songs you don't recognize but feel like lullabies for the ground itself. On rare occasions, she carries a broom and will sweep something gently, almost reverently, as if giving the dust permission to leave. You once asked her why she does it. "Because the world notices," she whispered, "and if no one listens, it sulks." You nodded like that made sense, because in the moment, it absolutely did. You pass her now, stepping carefully so as not to disturb her markings. She glances at your boots, then down at the faint smudge they've left on the road. She smiles faintly. No chalk today. You're safe. As you head back toward your own little home, feet sore and head fuzzy from the long walk, you realize that in a village full of shouters, scrubbers, stompy cloak dancers, and goat whisperers, Claudine may have the quietest role of all, but also the most magical, because she sees what others miss, and in doing so helps the whole village breathe a little easier, knowing someone out there is watching the dust, the patterns, the soft reminders that time too leaves its footprints. You've wandered nearly every corner of the village now. Your legs ache, the good kind of ache. Your brain is stuffed with more peculiar medieval job titles than you ever expected. And your eyelids have started doing that thing where they feel just a little too heavy for your face. But there's one last place to visit, and one final role to observe before sleep wraps you up like a fresh-baked bread roll. Near the old stone wall that marks the village boundary, under the watchful sway of a pear tree that hasn't grown a decent pear in 20 years, sits Marceau, the night listener. He doesn't speak much. In fact, many people assume he's mute. But that's just because he's listening, always, to everything. In the fading culture of folk beliefs and superstition that still clings like moss to the bones of this place, there is a very old tradition. Someone must be awake to hear the village sleep, not to watch it, not to guard it, just to hear it. It's said that when a village sleeps, it speaks, a language of creaks and sighs, soft breaths and distant dreams. And that if no one listens, the silence grows too deep. And bad things, the kind with cold toes and no names, begin to fill it. So Marceau listens. He sits on a worn bench with a cushion made from an old flour sack, his legs folded, hands cupped over his knees. He closes his eyes, not to sleep, but to hear better. And oh, what he hears. The scrape of shutters not quite latched, the flutter of laundry still hanging in the breeze, the low, rhythmic thunk of someone chopping onions at a terrible hour, the snores of the cobbler's dog who honestly needs to get that checked, and once, the whisper of a song from a house no one had lived in for years. Marceau made a chalk mark on the wall that night, just one line. No explanation. Historians still argue whether night listeners were real or just village eccentrics with too much time and not enough mattress. But in places like this, stories stick. And Marceau, quiet as he is, holds a place of honor. He started young, maybe 8 or 9, always drawn to the sounds others ignored. He once told you he could hear mushrooms growing. You laughed, and he didn't. Later that week, mushrooms did in fact sprout overnight near the mill house. He didn't say, "I told you so," but he did raise one eyebrow with the force of a sermon. He keeps a small book, made of scraps of parchment, bound in wool thread, where he sketches his observations. Not words exactly, symbols. A swirl for laughter, a square for silence, tiny lightning bolts for quarrels. You've seen him pause mid-listen and mark something without ever opening his eyes. Tonight, he hears everything. The beetle boy closing his box, the cloak stompers trundling off, still soggy, the bell tower's last creak as Luke settles into his nest of hay and rope. And you, of course, shuffling toward him with quiet footsteps and a mind full of dusty kids singing yeast and whispering dust. You sit beside him. You say nothing. He nods, just once. The two of you listen together. The breeze whistles through gaps in the stones. A cartwheel creaks even though there's no cart. A nightbird calls out once, then goes back to sleep. And somewhere, deep in the village, a child mumbles in a dream, "I told you that goat looked suspicious." You almost laugh, almost. But instead you lean back, let your eyes close, and listen. Not with ears, but with everything else. The cool air, the hush of distant breathing, the strange music of people at rest, stitched together by one shared silent need, to be heard even while dreaming. Marceau remains, he always does, long after you've drifted off, long after the stars begin to fade, long after the yeast snores and the candles gutter out and the dust sighs into corners. He listens for the village, for the peace, and for the soft sound of nothing going wrong. And now, dear listener, the village settles into the gentlest hush, the kind of silence that doesn't press in, but wraps around you like old linen, familiar, soft at the edges, and heavy in the way only a long day can be. You can still smell the faintest curl of wood smoke, hear the echo of a crow that definitely wasn't yours. Picture the smudges of chalk on a doorstep, the tilt of a nearly sleeping goat leaning against a fence post, the flicker of a candle someone forgot to snuff. And somewhere, there's still a bell tower breathing softly with rope and pigeon dust. Let your body sink deeper into the comfort you've made. Pillow beneath your head, blanket pulled just right. The air around you slow and even. There's nothing more you need to do. No goats to wrangle, no cloaks to stomp, no beetles to squish or dust to inspect. Just the gentle permission to be still, to drift, to let your thoughts wander wherever they feel most safe. Breathe in slowly, hold, and release. Whatever village you imagine, stone walls, creaky carts, the distant tap of chalk on stone, it's there, waiting, peaceful, quiet, because it knows someone's listening, knows you're listening, and maybe, just maybe, it's listening back. Good night, traveler. Sleep well. End of script. Sweet dreams.